Welcome to another edition of Vigorously with me, Val Kleinhands, Halloween week. So we're going all out with the spooky content and the music content. I guess that makes it really no different than any other week around here. But we feel especially lovely this week because I guess for this week it's deemed societally acceptable. Regardless, we're going to soak it in. We're embracing it this week. And we're going to chat about something that, to me, it is a serious topic, and it does have me very curious, and I really genuinely want to know what you have to say about some of this in the context, in the comments. And the context of it is what I was getting at. The context of what I'm about to say, we have to be really careful with because this is a little bit sensitive at times, and it's serious. We're chatting about serial killers this week. Superior serial killers. And I'm saying superior because we tend to put them on a pedestal. And I don't quite know why. But ever since forever, it seems to me, my entire lifetime anyway, it seems like we remember the names of these people. We remember what they did. We remember where they did it. We remember numbers of victims sometimes, how they killed their victims sometimes, and then what's worse is sometimes some other schmuck decides to do the same thing. And all of this just kind of begged the question, why? Why? What is our fascination? And hopefully I can come up with some sort of answer by the end of the episode today. That will be the goal. So what inspired this? I mean, really, truly, it is the Ed Gein series that's on Netflix right now, Monster, the Ed Gein Story. This is another Netflix production. We've done it with Dahmer now. That was, if I'm not mistaken, the first one. We've done it with the Menendez brothers. We dove into that. And now we have done it again with Ed Gein. Subject matter. I mean, come on. Like, it just doesn't seem to go away, especially this time of year, which I guess makes sense. But it just, when horrific things are featured online and on TV, it just seems a little bit like it's everywhere. And it's featured everywhere constantly, not just during spooky season, but year round. So the goal of this episode, like I was saying, is to just take a look at our own mental health and consider ways to check ourselves when it comes to this and take a look at what's really going on here. The Ed Gein series, I did start it, I did finish it, and I have some words. I have some words about the Ed Gein series. It did premiere this past October 3rd, for those of you who missed it. It is the third season of the anthology Monster series, like I was saying, created by Ian Brennan for Netflix. Ryan Murphy is also involved here, so if it gives American Horror Story at any point, and trust me, it does, we'll get into all that. That is why he still does, even though he's only, I believe, an executive producer this time. That's why it has a little bit of an American Horror Story feel to it. Here's some of my own thoughts that I took away from watching it. Firstly, what struck me was how accurate they made Wisconsin and the middle of winter in Wisconsin look, particularly in rural Wisconsin, which is where this takes place. It takes place in Plainfield, Wisconsin, in the 50s, late 40s and into the 50s. And then the story kind of spans other decades from there. But that's largely where the meat of Ed's story, ooh, pun intended. That's largely where it takes place. It looked very real. It looked like this is what I would see if I were driving I-90, passing Janesville. Like, it looked like, yeah, if I were looking to the side of the highway and I was stopping in a small town in Wisconsin in the middle of winter and it's a farm town, this is what it would look like. So kudos to whoever made that production decision, because you nailed it. The look was absolutely accurate of what a town like Plainfield would look like. I don't think they actually shot this in Plainfield. I'm pretty sure from what I read, they shot it in Illinois, in rural Illinois, which would be close enough. But yeah, they did a good job making it look like what Plainfield, Wisconsin does actually look like. Some people had a problem with how Ed's story was kind of interwoven with the movies that took bits and pieces of the accounts of what he did. I didn't mind the fact that they were interweaving this little bits about the story of Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not so much Silence of the Lambs, but there was a little bit of a nod to Silence of the Lambs, obviously for Buffalo Bill's character. There were definitely nods to the impact of Ed's actions and what they had, and how that manifested in pop culture and in movies. There was nods to how his story played out in the movies, and to the movies that decided to base their story off of what he did. If you're coming here and you're not knowing who Ed Gein is, maybe I should start there too. The man's a serial killer. Okay? The man's a serial killer. He didn't do great things. And he did it in the middle of rural Wisconsin in the 50s, and was largely, some credit him as being one of the first ones to do it on the level that he did, and to do horrific things with the bodies. To do those things that he did. I'm not going to get super, super detailed on what actually happened, because I think that kind of defeats the purpose, and it can be a little bit graphic. So we'll skip that. We know the story. If you're here, you probably know the story. But if you don't, that's enough background. That's what you really, really need to know. So those flashes, going back to the nods to the movies that are kind of based on Ed and the story and what happened, I didn't mind those flashes, because I think what they allowed for was an opportunity to analyze how a serial killer becomes a celebrity. And they sort of showed how it happens in real time and how those stories become part of pop culture. Let's not forget, Psycho only came out, if I'm not mistaken, a few years, within 5 years of when Ed actually was prosecuted for his crimes. So this was fast. People were talking. Alfred Hitchcock saw an opportunity, took it, and then realized, and this is showcased in the series, oh, what have I done? I've now also put myself in a little bit of a box here, because how do I get more grotesque and get more attention than what the story already provides in itself? Because it's already pretty bad. And you can watch Hitchcock wrestle with that, which obviously this is speculation, which is another point I'm going to make here about trying to discern what is speculation and what's real. That was difficult to do this series, and that was kind of one of the points of contention about this series for me. But going back to Hitchcock and the movies, it was interesting to see him wrestle with that and go, ooh, I don't know where to go from here. because the audience apparently is interested in the story. We already have their attention. How do I get their attention again? Because what we did to grab it was already show you something pretty intense. How do you do that? Well, ended up that Hitchcock focused on other movies in his career, and I think he saw what he had done, and maybe the series kind of suggests that he sort of took a step back a little bit from the graphic nature anyway of his movies after that. But then we see Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the origin of that. I don't know if it's a true story, but supposedly that the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre heard about the Ed Gein story, wanted to do his own take with a horror movie on, and he did up the torture. He did up the grotesque nature of the movie. He did level up, in my opinion, from Psycho. But for the time, Psycho was already very intense. Psycho was already a lot. Texas Chainsaw Massacre upped it by the time we get to 1973. And then there's this other random flash of the filming of Silence of the Lambs and a little bit of a nod to Buffalo Bill. And I think the point of it was just to say, and just to reference the fact that Ed was the basis of that character as well. Silence of the Lambs obviously coming to us in the early 90s. So while I didn't mind those flashes back to the movies that are based on the story, and in particular, the focus on Tony Perkins, who plays Norman Bates in Psycho, based on Ed. Particularly the focus on his struggle with playing the character and wrestling with what happened with his career after playing such a character. Woo! That was interesting. I think it gave you something to think about. And there was some commentary on pop culture and how far we can take the subject of serial killers as well. How far do you take this? How interested do you get people? How far do you take it before it becomes a problem? To me, every single flashback to a movie that was based on this story was a reminder of that, and definitely shows us that this is how a serial killer becomes a celebrity. And then we see the moments later on where Ed's getting fan letters and Ed's getting letters from other serial killers that are committing crime after Ed was already put away. I mean, and they're referencing him and they're saying, I idolize you. And it gets wild. And I think that that's one thing this series does well. However, sometimes I thought that I'll call them the hallucinations, the dream sequences. First off, it's hard to decipher which is which, what's reality and what's a dream and what's a hallucination and what actually happened and what didn't actually happen. So I'm going to recommend this. If you do choose to watch Monster, the Ed Gein Story on Netflix, read up on what really happened first so you can keep your focus and have something to refer to as you watch this, so that you have an easier time discerning what really happened and what didn't really happen, because they're going to play with that this whole series. They're going to play with that. And maybe that was, to say, well, this is what was going on in Ed's own mind, or it was a theory on this is probably what happened in Ed's own mind. So why wouldn't the series reflect all of that? But I take issue with it when you're outright fabricating certain things. Like, you're insinuating that he killed his brother. There's no evidence of that. We don't know that happened. Whether or not he had a girlfriend, that's up for debate, but this series seems to confidently say, yeah, he had a girlfriend. And in some ways, you could argue that she was an accomplice. Like, that's how far this is taking some of this. The fact that he was dating Bernice Warden, one of the victims, like, they allude to that in this series. There's no evidence of that. The babysitter episode where supposedly they're suggesting he killed a local babysitter in the area after she got a babysitting job that he lost. That's not verified or confirmed. That woman went missing the next town over. There's no evidence that Ed was actually involved in any of that. This is an example. The Bernice Warden story. Yes, it's true that she was one of his victims, but did they have a relationship before? Did it really get that intense before? No. We don't know is what I'm going to say. We don't know for certain that that's what happened. Implying that he was dating her. I think that's a bit of a stretch, and I think it's kind of dangerous a little bit. It's inaccurate to suggest certain things, and given how serious the nature of the story is, I think you have to primarily, if I were to do it, if I were to put a series together like this, I would do everything I could to stay as close to what actually happened without insinuating anything else as I possibly could, because I would imagine that it would be graphic for the general public and especially hurtful for anybody that's connected to the case that's still alive. Why would they want that type of fabrication out there? I mean, if it were my family member, I wouldn't want that, is kind of how I would treat this. So I wouldn't do it. But they took a lot of liberties in suggesting some things that there are obviously, there's no evidence for, there's no confirmation of, there's no documentation of. There's just some insinuations here that are a little bit weird and off, and there didn't seem to be a reason for it, and there just wasn't enough of a focus on what was actually documented as what happened in this story. So it made it difficult to buy any of it, almost, at least for me, because you could tell that there was some obvious fabrications. You were like, well, now I don't know what I'm watching because I don't know what's real and what's not. And that's a little bit frustrating, I think, as a viewer. But it did raise some other interesting questions when it comes to, like I said, the topic of celebrity as it applies to serial killers and pop culture. Here's another question that I had. The voice that Charlie Hunnam puts on as he's playing Ed Gein. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? I don't know of anybody in Wisconsin that speaks like that, number one. And number two, it was giving Kermit the Frog a little bit. And I don't know how Ed spoke. And maybe that was just a creative decision because, to my knowledge, there really isn't a lot of recorded vocals of his to refer to on this. So maybe Charlie had to come up with it. Maybe Charlie had to take some creative liberty there and just imagine. Maybe. I mean, I think some of the phrasing was probably accurate for the 50s, but the Kermit the Frog kind of vibe to the voice, I mean, we don't know for certain that that's how Ed spoke. And again, that could have happened because we don't have a lot to reference when it comes to what he actually sounded like either. So maybe some liberties were taken there because there was no choice in the matter. Maybe. So we'll give him a little bit of grace for that. But just that was a little bit odd. That was a little bit odd to me. If you are interested in the subject, if you are interested in the monster anthology itself and its return to Netflix, apparently we're getting Lizzie Borden and that story next. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm like, ooh, this one wasn't all that great. I would probably give it a 5 out of 10. It was sometimes it was just too wild for me to be interested. Like, or keep my head on straight while I was watching it. And that may have been the intention, but for me, I don't know about that. So it's like, you started to do it with the Menendez brothers. I could see there. Dahmer was pretty spot on. Dahmer I actually enjoyed because I was like, oh, yeah, this is pretty, for the most part, true to what actually happened. Menendez brothers, you start to see some liberties taken. And then Ed Gein, it's like full send. There's a lot of fallacy and a lot of liberties taken in how the story is told. I don't know what they're going to do with Lizzie Borden, and I'm on the fence. I'm like 50-50. There's part of me that wants to watch it just to see if they're going to do it again, or if it's going to be actually enjoyable and stay mostly true to what happened. That one, again, I don't know how much documentation there is about Lizzie Borden and what really happened either. So I can imagine that if you don't have a whole lot to reference, that's going to leave more room for some liberties to be taken, especially when you have 8 or 10 episodes to fill. So, I don't know. I'm a little bit I'm a little bit skeptical about this upcoming one, but maybe we'll give it a chance. We'll see. I might wait a week and see what people are saying about it before I really dive into it. Obviously, my number one question that I had while watching this thing in its entirety was, why are we so obsessed with serial killers? Now, initially, for my part, I was just interested in the subject just to learn about how dangerous people can really be. And to me, the interest in any type of serial killer story was just to it was kind of like a grim fairy tale, or, to me, it served as a warning. I was like, oh, I better know about what happened here because someone might do it to me. And that's kind of where my interest in it lied, and that's where it stayed. It didn't really go beyond that. But there have been attempts to try and answer that question as to why we are so obsessed with serial killers. An article in Boston University's own BU Today, written by Sophie Yerin, sums this up very well. And I decided that I would like to read some of it to you. Largely what it suggests is that women, it focuses, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it does focus on there being a difference in why men would be interested in the story of a serial killer versus why women would be interested in the story of a serial killer. So it has to do with safety and security. I'll read. Yeah, just double checking a few things here. So in the article, I'll read a part of it for you. Deborah Amelio, College of Communication Associate Professor of Film and Television Studies, says the phenomenon with serial killers is easy to understand from this perspective of an American audience. She explains that our media environment is especially well suited to creating celebrity and sustaining that celebrity. Remember, I talked about there being a focus on that. Says Jaramillo, who teaches a course on true crime media, we have this idea of the celebrity criminal, and serial killers do turn into celebrities. However, Jaramillo says the phenomenon can be better understood when broken down by race and gender. Her true crime classes do tend to be, and she does disclose this, anywhere from 90 to 95% women. And a visiting professor at Lemoyne College also agreed with that sentiment that she's also cited in this article. Upwards of 70% of true crime consumers, according to Consumer Reports, are heterosexually partnered, college-educated women somewhere between 18 and 34. Noting her own researched a similar conclusion. So it reflected, and we're talking about Heather Mooney. She is a PhD, and she did research at BU, which is used in this article. And she's saying her research reflected what this other report found. So the biggest question, why do women consume true crime, me included sometimes? The biggest answer that she got was safety and security. That it's a form of preventative education. Mooney explains. How do I learn what the red flags are? Well, that's how you learn. You learn by watching. Jaramillo says that among her students, bonding over true crime also builds a sense of community. So we've got that going on because it's like any other type of fandom. You bond over liking the same things. Mooney's research found that a viewer's race and gender may help explain what type of true crime that they are drawn to. Particularly women of color, Black women, tend to focus on unsolved crimes that are impacting their own communities. Obviously, there's going to be things you relate to there that would make sense. Their case isn't being covered by mainstream media, so that was something that came up a lot. And to them, they want as much information as possible, again, as a form of preventative education. And I'm paraphrasing a lot of this article here. It's called Why Are We So Obsessed with Serial Killers in BU Today. And this was done November 2nd, 2023, around the time that this whole anthology series on Netflix started. Speaking to the male interest in true crime and serial killers, Mooney says the men that she spoke to were primarily interested in the genre out of a desire to be a protector. They were like, this is why I carry a gun. This is what I need to know to defend my girlfriend, my sister, my wife, my kids. A lot of people, mainly men, become interested in fields like criminal justice and pre-law because of stories about serial killers, and that is a powerful access point. There is some sort of stimulation that happens here, and people tend to use it as preventative education. That's largely what this article boils down to after a surveying of students and her own research as professor. So I co-sign on that. Particularly for women, learning about these cases can become preventative education. I have felt the same way. Sort of gets you used to the lines that a serial killer might use, or that anybody really, whether a serial killer or not. It lets you build some awareness of what a bad situation might look like, so that hopefully you can avoid it. Somehow, learning about these cases helps us feel a sense of control over the chaos. I think we can agree with that too. Here's another thought that I've had because this particular year has been especially violent, politically violent. I have to wonder if real, actual violence that is hitting the majority of people, real wasn't the right word there, but what I mean is when violence becomes mainstream, can that deter our interest in serial killers? I had that thought because I am exhausted by how prevalent gun violence is and how prevalent those stories are now, in our own cities, in our own towns, our own backyards, our country. If you're an American listening to this, you know that. It's not a secret to you. There has been an uptick in all of this year, and I struggle with that. So it's just a thought I had. I hope, perhaps, in a weird way, that seeing more of it become personal might deter us from seeking out this type of story as more than just a case study. And hopefully maybe we can start to simply leave it there, because I think that that's where it should stay. That's what I got for you this week. Those are some things to think about, some things to simmer on. If you agree, let me know in the comments. We'll always chat more about this. That's what I thought about the series too. You could let me know. Let me know what you thought about the Ed Gein series, and let me know if you agree, and if you plan on watching the next edition of Monster in Lizzie Borden. I don't know. We don't have a date for that one yet, but I don't know about that one. Happy Halloween week. Enjoy it. Get spooky within reason. That's what I'll leave you with this week. We'll see ya. Bye.